So it's a little over a year since the Aerosoft Twin Otter for Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 was announced. It was originally going to be the first Aerosoft aircraft for 2020, hasn't worked out that way, but it is on track and it's going to be delivered this year, 2021, which means sometime in the next 2 months. We're currently on the last day of October 21, so the product is a real product. We've seen plenty of screenshots and a lot of chatter about it in the forums. There's a very active Aerosoft forum about this aircraft. It is in beta testing, has been for about a month. I'm not on the beta for that project, which surprised me somewhat, but not to worry, I will buy the aircraft when it comes out, and you can be sure I'll be doing one or more videos, probably reviewing the aircraft in some depth, but I thought it would be helpful to just look at what we know about this aircraft, good and bad. So that's the purpose of this short video today, just really the information that's coming out of the forum. Now, interestingly enough, the chatter about this project in a sense started back in 2017 when Aerosoft announced tentatively that it was thinking about doing an update for the Twin Otter Extended, specifically to focus on Prepared version 4. That was kind of preempted by the sudden announcement of Flight Sim 2020, and Aerosoft then decided that they would abandon the update for Prepared and begin work on a product for 2020 instead. And indeed this product is said to be built from the ground up, so it's not a port or a revamp of the Twin Otter Extended, although we have to presume that some of the logic will make it across. So what do we know? Well, this is going to be a fairly comprehensive package for FS 2020 in the sense that we're going to get, I think, 14 different variants of the aircraft. This is going to be the traditional old-fashioned Twin Otter models. We're going to get the 100 series and the 300 series exclusively with the conventional or steam gauges, no glass cockpit here, and that means no Viking 400 series. We are going to have a fairly modern variant in the sense that it's going to support the GPS, the GNS 530 and the GNS 430 GPS. We've seen the panel, and again it's modelled on a specific aircraft. I think pretty much the same aircraft that Aerosoft used to model the Twin Otter Extended, although there are some changes to the panel. Liveries, we've got all sorts of different liveries if that's important to you. I should say that most of the chatter and almost all of the images in the Aerosoft forum have focused on the outside of the aircraft, so the look and the liveries and the attention to detail, and it is very, very impressive, it has to be said, but I've said this before in my videos, it's really not that important if your focus is on flying the aircraft, because you don't look at it from the outside. We have seen some pictures of the panel. The panel's okay, it's pretty much on a par with the Twin Otter Extended. It looks very similar to the Twin Otter Extended, as you'd expect. It's difficult to tell just from the screenshots whether the quality of the images is very much different, so time will tell when we see that live. But it is quite telling that most of the chatter has been about the exterior of the aircraft, and it's quite frustrating because we don't really know much about how this is going to handle. A lot of this obviously depends on the SDK and the feature set of FS 2020, and there is some talk about the turboprop modelling still being lacking, although it is being revamped incrementally as the service updates come out. So what else do we know about this aircraft? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Early on I inquired as to whether we'd get all of the LVARs and so on exposed, or in fact not just exposed but designed with cockpit builders in mind, and I was assured that yes we would, and it's since been confirmed that all of the LVARs will be published when the aircraft is complete. Now the downside is there's also been some rumblings about what level of systems modelling would and wouldn't be included, and that's quite disappointing in some ways. Aerosoft has come out and said that, in quite a defensive way, I have to say, that this is going to be a budget-priced aircraft in this, well, I should qualify it, not a budget priced aircraft, but it's in the relatively low end cost range. Mathias has made a distinction between the $25 and the $50 range, or the $25 to $30 and $50 to $70 range aircraft types, if you like, and he's very much put the Twin Otter in the lower end. And you know, there are business reasons for doing that, but also it introduces particular constraints on the amount of work that can go into it, and secondary to that, you know, the complexity of what's modelled. One of the things that was quite worrying is that he's come out and said that for the navigation instruments they're going to use the default FS 2020 gauges. Now, it's not really clear exactly what he was referring to when he talked about navigation instruments there, but hopefully that just means it's going to use the default GNS 530 and 430 implementations, which indeed that particular aspect has been confirmed in some later posts, and one of the reasons behind that, which makes sense, is that it will then plug into the FS 2020 flight planning system and so on. So as long as that GNS 530, 430 implementation in FS 2020 is of acceptable quality, which actually isn't, or it may. I'm a bit out of the loop. I haven't got the latest service updates at the moment, but it's been notoriously lacking so far. But there is a freeware update, which I've talked about in one of my previous videos. But ultimately, as long as what we can get up and running, including freeware add-ons if we need to, is adequate, and then if the Twin Otter uses those systems, then fine. I can't see any problems with that. It is good to see that we've got the 530 and the 430. That's one of the few differences in the avionics that are visible on the new panel. So that should open up some interesting new possibilities. There is something else about the panel which again may be a worry when you consider it alongside that statement about using default navigation gauges. There's a peculiarity about the autopilots. There's the Collins AP106 autopilot, which you will be familiar with from the Twin Otter Extended, is included on the panel. Everything looks the same. But there's also a KAP140 Honeywell, or is it Bendix King KAP140 autopilot. Now, to me, that doesn't seem to make sense, having both of those autopilots in there. I can't quite imagine how that would work in the real world. I have a slight worry that that Bendix King autopilot has been inserted as the primary autopilot, and that the Collins AP106, which is idiosyncratic but is actually part of the fun of, you know, using the Twin Otter Extended, is getting to understand the particular foibles, the limitations and the affordances of that autopilot. So time will tell. You know, Mathias did, you know, when I queried this way back in the summer, did say he would check how that was all going to work. We didn't get a response on that. So the worst case scenario actually is, as someone suggested, the Bendix King may be the active autopilot, and the Collins AP106, in quotes, may just slave to it, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because they're quite dissimilar systems. Now, one thing that pulls against that story is that from the earliest shots of the Twin Otter panel, we've seen that, what looks like that Bendix King autopilot. So maybe there is some coherent logic behind that. The other thing about the default gauges for navigation statement is that Mathias has come right out and said, you know, one of the rationales for that is to make sure that this aircraft can be flown easily from the Xbox version of FS 2020, which has been released by now. And he's, you know, gone on to elaborate on that, and then gone on to say that this will anger a lot of hardened Twin Otter Extended fans who are expecting a hardcore implementation. And he's more or less said, well, without saying it, but, you know, has implied very strongly that this will be essentially I hesitate to say a dumbed down version of the Twin Otter, but really that's what I think he means. And you know, just to cement that, he's gone on to say it's possible that later they will consider a PC only extended version. So we have to watch this space and hope that you know, I mean, we have to temper this as well with my gradual realisation over the lifetime of my Twin Otter project that the Twin Otter Extended itself wasn't really a very deep simulation. You know, some of the systems were there and could be tinkered with, and that was nice, and it gave the illusion of, you know, greater depth than perhaps there was. So to hear that we're going to be taking a backward step from systems modelling, I'm not really sure what I think about that at the moment. You know, okay, for my money, what we really need, above all else, to make this a useful and interesting product to fly, is a good fully featured autopilot, preferably the original Collins autopilot with the altitude alert functions and so on. A good working GNS 530 and or 430 which has basic functionality over and above what we got with the early iterations of FS 2020. What else? Good ground handling, which we had a lack of in Prepared with the Twin Otter Extended. The ground handling was very poor, in fact unacceptable in Prepared. We need a good engine, turboprop engine model, including fixing that, you know, over laggy spool up, which is, you know, one of the reasons that turboprops are supposed to score over jets. Hopefully that's going to be fixed. I guess modelling of the beta system, or at least of the reverse system, you know, I think people make more of this than is really that important. Differential engine power working more effectively for taxiing on the water, that's something that people have talked about. I haven't really flown the Twin Otter Extended from the water very much at all, but that is something I'd quite like to do in FS 2020 because it just looks so much better. We don't really know what the water physics is going to be like ultimately, but hopefully it's going to be an improvement. And of course it makes a lot of different categories of expedition more accessible if you can fly off the water. Of course a good flight model is something we want. The flight model in FSX and Prepared with the Twin Otter Extended was okay. It had some slight anomalies, particularly that feature where the nose would drop when you increase power and the nose would rise when you back off the power. I think we established eventually that that was unrealistic, so we hope that's been fixed. Just, you know, good short field performance, but realistic. You know, by realistic, we want it to matter if you're flying this precisely and correctly, and to have consequences if you're not. I mean, that's really, you know, part of the challenge of flying this, particularly into short fields. The icing model's got some good publicity. This is, I guess, using the default icing in FS 2020. Now, I've experienced this in the Cessna 172 already. The Cessna 172 doesn't actually have any anti-ice or de-icing measures as far as I recall, so, you know, all I can say is the icing comes, looks nice on the windscreen, and the pictures from FS 2020 and the Twin Otter look amazing. But the question really is whether you can usefully and rationally make use of the anti-ice and de-icing measures. So those systems need to be modelled. Everything else, you know, the electrical system and so on, not that important, honestly. You know, although I'd wired up all the startup and test functions in my cockpit, I never used any of that, to be honest. It is encouraging to hear that the manual is going to be fairly comprehensive and quite extensive for this product, so that speaks to some level of depth in the simulation. Interestingly enough, Matthias has said there is a book which you might have heard of called Twin Otter Extended You Have Control, which is a German book. It's only published in German, but apparently he's translating that book into English and including it as part of the manual, and I think it's a 250-page book, so look forward to that. So that's it really. We don't know very much about this aircraft, but we do know that it's going to be released before Christmas, and we're going to get 14 different variations, including a skydive model, if that matters. I don't think that really, you know, it's going to make any difference from the cockpit, but it'll be nice to have a familiar aircraft to fly in FS 2020 and to go exploring. So watch this space. I will be getting that aircraft as soon as it's out, be giving it quite a lot of attention. We'll be looking at what is and isn't included in some degree of detail. Some of it might be critical, but Aerosoft being Aerosoft, hopefully it's going to be a worthy purchase. And who knows, it may prompt a whole new series of videos about the Twin Otter.